All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, From Intention to Action, Building Diverse, Inclusive Teams to Deepen Impact, featuring Allison Wyatt and Nancy Harris of Koya Leadership Partners. This webinar will focus on strategies and tools that you can use to more effectively address diversity and inclusion within your organization. The Cornerstone On Demand Foundation is excited to sponsor this presentation, and we thank you for attending. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To reduce background noise, all lines have been muted. Please note that there's also a chat box located in the middle right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time, as we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Now, before I hand it over to our presenter, I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce myself and the Cornerstone On Demand Foundation as the host of this presentation. My name is Justin Waddell, and I work within the Nonprofit Empowerment Program here at the Foundation, which was launched in 2009 in an effort to provide learning and talent management technology and pro bono HR consulting services to the nonprofit sector, both domestically and abroad. Today's webinar is an ongoing part of our nonprofit webinar series designed to provide expertise and best practices related to talent management and organizational development for nonprofit leaders. This webinar series is an extension of our HR Pro Bono Core, a Cornerstone On Demand Foundation initiative which provides HR-related coaching and consulting to nonprofit organizations at no cost. The HR Pro Bono Core focuses its support in 4 areas: performance, learning, recruitment, and succession management. If you're interested in learning more about how your organization can benefit from these services, please visit our website at cornerstoneondemand.org. Now, today's session and the associated slides will be posted to the Cornerstone On Demand Foundation's Nonprofit Ready Learning Portal within 24 hours. For those not yet familiar with Nonprofit Ready, it is the Cornerstone On Demand Foundation's no-cost professional development portal for nonprofits. In addition to housing all of the Foundation's webinars, Nonprofit Ready contains over 200 learning resources designed to help advance your nonprofit career and increase your impact within the community. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to this resource. Please feel free to share this presentation with coworkers and friends. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Allison and Nancy. Thank you again both for sharing your expertise today. I'll now pass it over to you.
Thank you, Justin. So my name is Allison Wyatt, and I thought I would begin by just telling you a little bit about myself and the work that I do at Koya Leadership Partners. My role is to lead the human capital consulting practice, which is really focused on helping organizations maximize their impact through their people. And I have over a decade of really diverse human capital experience, both in the for-profit and not-for-profit sectors, in large and small organizations at multiple stages in their growth cycle, working from organizations such as Time Warner to serving as a founding member of a national rapidly growing nonprofit as their head of talent. So I have a pretty broad span of experience and really focused on doing work now in the nonprofit space around smart succession planning, talent development, and retention strategies that enable a diverse workforce to thrive and drive transformative results in the sector. You know, throughout my career, I've seen how diverse and inclusive teams lead to better executed and more high-quality solutions, but I've also seen nonprofit organizations struggle with how to achieve this, and this really led me to lead a study this past year at Koya on diversity and inclusion practices in the nonprofit space. Specifically, our study was focused in education reform, but certainly more globally applicable. And our discussion today is really going to cover the best practices revealed in that study. Before we begin, I just want to invite my colleague, Nancy, to introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for joining the call today. As Allison stated, my name is Nancy Harris, and I have been doing human capital consulting and an HR practitioner for approximately 20 years now. And I really have an expertise and a passion for several areas such as talent management, change management, and organization effectiveness. I've had the opportunity to work with Fortune 500 companies and some nonprofits as well. really helping to partner with businesses to help align their business and HR strategies, along with transforming their cultures and developing their leaders. And one of the key things that I've seen over the course of probably about the last 20 years that I've been working, and particularly in the last 10 or so years, has been a focus on diversity and inclusion and its importance to an organization and its bottom line. So I'm really excited today to be joining Allison to talk about such an exciting topic that I'm passionate about as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So we have a full agenda for today's webinar. We're just going to start by reminding ourselves why diversity is so important and how it can make our organizations stronger and our impact more effective. Then we're going to dig into some best practices that we've learned about through our research and our work in this area. And of course, we will also leave some time at the end to address any questions that may come up, last-minute questions that you may have. So with that, we will get started. With the first item, why is this so critical to the success of our sector? You know, the private sector has really studied the business case for diversity in depth. And in looking at business performance from 2000 and 2010, for example, McKinsey revealed that companies that had more diverse leadership teams were also top financial performers. And actually, it's interesting because I just saw another article on this yesterday talking about gender diversity and how that ties to financial performance and leadership. So there have been several studies out there that have shown this really does improve performance. We also see that organizations with strong diversity and inclusion policies that enable clear focus and around recruitment and broadening their talent pool just allow them to be more competitive when it comes to hiring the best people. So it's an opportunity to elevate the quality of people that you're bringing into your organizations. And in addition, they're able to retain diverse high performers and reduce employee turnover, and of course all of the costs associated in that from lost productivity, training, and whatnot. We've also seen they were better able to develop a competitive advantage by understanding and addressing unmet needs of diverse stakeholders. So the Center for Talent Innovation calls this matching the market, where you're able to come up with products and solutions that are more relevant and effective. We know that companies with more diverse teams also make better decisions. Kellogg the Kellogg School of Management did a study that showed that diverse groups triggered more careful information processing than that they found was actually absent in groups where people were more alike. So we know that diversity leads to better results, to more innovation, and it's really imperative for the transformative solutions that are required for the challenging issues that our sector faces. And I'm going to just apologize because my computer screen froze momentarily, but I will get to the next slide in just a moment when it turns back on. So the key thing is here, we know that this is important, yet we find that when we look at who's in charge, who's making decisions, who controls the resources, we find that the higher up you go in the organizational ranks, the less diversity exists. And this next slide will illustrate that. So we all know this is important. And the question is, what do we do about it? I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to talk about some best practices that can help reverse this trend.
Thanks, Allison. So there's a couple of key things to point out here, and I'll go through these and we'll spend some more time going over them in detail. But there are some key best practices that came out of the survey. One of which is, ensuring that there's a custom vision and strategy. So you've got to make sure that your diversity and inclusion strategy is aligned with your business mission. The other part is leadership and accountability, making sure that your leadership and employees are fully aligned and embracing diversity and inclusion, and that there is somebody accountable for the diversity and inclusion within your organization. The other part is around effectively recruiting and developing talent within your organization. Allison touched on that briefly, but it's really important and a key aspect in terms of making sure you embed diversity within your organization. And lastly, making sure that there's communication around this so that it's internal, that it's strategic, and that there's an ongoing dialogue about diversity within your organization. I think one of the most important things, and I've seen this with some of the organizations that I've worked with, is that sometimes leaders want something done quick and fast and one communication and you're done with diversity and inclusion. And I always try to stress to them that it's very important, that it's ongoing, and it should become a part of your culture. Here's a key best practice that I'd like to just highlight, and I touched on this a little bit briefly, is around leadership and the importance of making sure that we have engagement from our leadership teams in order to make diversity succeed within an organization. So just to quote this, it just says, organizations that engage their top leaders, helping them to really understand why diversity is important, those organizations are the ones that see the most success and the most diversity in their organization as well. And they also have to make sure that they are aligning it with their strategic vision and their mission. Now let's take a little bit of an in-depth look at the best practice around customizing your diversity vision and strategy and making sure that it's aligned. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is you really have to start as a baseline with knowing and understanding what is your organization's mission, what's the culture, and the population as well. So that's the fundamental starting point when you're talking about aligning your diversity and inclusion with your mission. The other part that's important to look at is making sure that you customize it. Just because something may work in one organization does not necessarily mean that it will work in your organization. So it's important to make sure that you customize it, that it's aligned to your specific vision, and that it's unique to your specific needs. And the other part around that that's closely aligned is making sure that you tailor your communication around that vision. Oftentimes organizations will say, I don't understand the importance of diversity, or how does this align or make our business better? And the more you can, again, tie that into the vision and communicate that is very important. I'll use a particular example of an organization that I worked with. And their mission, or their goal at the time, was they really wanted to expand into Latin America. That was one of their business goals and business drivers. And I worked with them to come up with, how can we align this with our diversity and inclusion strategy? And one of the things that we did was we really made it a part of our talent acquisition strategy. Where do we want to recruit from? And we tied it right back to the mission of building and growing in Latin America. So we were very specific about making sure that we hired people with specific skills or experience in Latin America, that had specific language skills as well. So it was a really, really easy for everyone in the organization to understand how we were tying our diversity into our business mission. The other thing that's very important is making sure that there's someone accountable in your organization for diversity and inclusion. You want to make sure that there's an individual that's accountable and that there's clear roles and responsibilities. And another big thing, very important, is to make sure that there's some way to measure this. What are the key performance indicators to make sure that you track that success? And if you need to change, go a different direction and adapt, that you have the measurements in place to be able to do so. So I want to go on to a poll question and ask everyone in the audience, how many of you can name a single person in your organization who is ultimately accountable for the diversity and inclusion of your organization? So if you could go ahead and answer that question right now, and Justin will go ahead and tabulate those results.
Hi, everyone. The poll is currently open in the lower right-hand side of your screen. Please take the next 30 seconds to submit your response. Thank you.
While the poll is going on, I will use another example around kind of the importance of making sure that you have somebody that's an individual that's accountable for diversity and inclusion within your organization. And again, I'll use another example of a Fortune 500 organization that I worked with, and we were focusing specifically on how do we build a more diverse and inclusive culture within the group. And one of the first things we did was hire someone specifically accountable for diversity and inclusion. But not only did we just hire a person that was responsible for diversity and inclusion, we also made sure that we embedded specific performance metrics in every manager's performance review as well as employees. So we were very clear that not only did we have one person that was ultimately accountable, but that we wanted to make sure that it was embedded throughout the culture within the organization as well.
I think that's such an important point, Nancy, because I think you have to have everybody in the organization not just theoretically bought in, but really focused on achieving those results. And managers in particular are on the front lines making decisions every day. So we see the clients we work with who are most successful in this work have somebody who sets the vision, the strategy, the ways in which people advance this work, and ultimately who is accountable for overarching success. But part of their role is to define how everybody gets involved, define everybody's roles and responsibilities, and make sure that happens. So I think that's just such an important key point to highlight.
Justin, I didn't know if you had the results of our poll.
I do, and right now, 65% of respondents cannot name a single person in their organization who's ultimately accountable for diversity and inclusion.
Okay, that's great. I mean, that's not great that 65% can't identify with someone, but I think it's good to know that, you know, with that information in mind, you can maybe come into some of your organizations and maybe provide a suggestion around, you know, either hiring an individual or having that being part of someone's particular role to help drive diversity within the organization. And I just wanted to highlight the next slide that came up is I think this is something that was pretty consistent in the study that was done. So it was the responsibility of all, so everyone in the organization was responsible for diversity and inclusion, but it wasn't owned by one particular person to really drive it within the organization. So I think there's a couple of good quotes there. It does not appear on anyone's job description to focus on diversity and inclusion. And as we've talked about time and time again, if something's not measured, then it doesn't get done in an organization. So it's interesting to see how the results of our poll mirrored the results of the study that was done as well.
Yeah, and I just think it's almost it's not an exact metaphor, but almost a tragedy of the commons. And I think the thing that I say when we talk to organizations that, you know, have shared responsibility or just everybody's responsible is, you know, think about fundraising, right? Another top priority for your organization. would you ever not have somebody ultimately accountable for that? There's no way, right? You would absolutely ensure that somebody was responsible for setting the vision, the strategy, the plan, the goals, and making sure everything happened. And I think it's no different when you're thinking about diversity and inclusion. There has to be somebody really thinking about it from that perspective, and just showing employees and charting a path for how people can engage and advance the work.
Thanks, Allison. The other part I'd like to focus on is another key best practice that came out of the study. And I touched on it a little bit when I mentioned what doesn't get measured doesn't get done, is around the accountability and measurement piece. And as you can see on this diagram, we want to make sure in terms of best practices that there's one person that's ultimately responsible for diversity and inclusion. And that is also tied to some strategic key performance indicators. Organizations must have measures in place to ensure that diversity becomes a priority, and also to measure whether or not what they're currently doing is working within their organization. Because sometimes you need to adapt your approach or change it, because what may have worked 3 or 5 years ago may not be currently working now. So it's really important to make sure that you've got measures in place to review and update and find out where you are in terms of your diversity and inclusion. And the other point that's also very important is that you have communications around it, that it's transparent, that your leadership team is communicating where you are and where you stand and the importance of diversity within your organization. So here are some things that you want to measure, and here are some ways that you can go about doing that. The most important thing is to understand how your employees think about and experience the organization from their unique and different perspectives. One of the things that we think is very important is to make sure that you have some type of employee engagement survey and that you conduct that on a regular basis. Most organizations do one on an annual basis. And then they do some internal benchmarking just to see how engaged their overall population is, but also to take a look at some subgroups. So, for example, a group that I worked with really wanted to know how females were faring in their organization. So they did a baseline employee engagement survey, and they were able to take that subgroup of female respondents and see some pretty interesting trends around who was advancing in the organization, who was not advancing in the organization, and how the female population viewed the organization in general. So there were some really good information, themes, and action items that you're able to take out of those employee engagement surveys. You can look at turnover results by group, and you can also just look at turnover results in general. So again, some of those key performance indicators could change by your organization, depending again on what your values and missions are. But I think it's important to make sure that you've got something in place to assess and measure where you're going and how your diversity efforts are measuring up.
Great, thank you, Nancy. So I'm going to talk a little about how a best practice we also revealed in our study, which really was focused on building pipelines of talent for future opportunities, and doing that both externally, but also thinking about your internal talent and how you're preparing people to take on, leadership opportunities in the future. And that can be a really powerful equation for organizations as they grow and as their leadership needs change. So So what we found, and Koya, you know, we do a lot of executive search work, and so we work with organizations on a daily basis, both through our diversity work, but also specifically with executive search, on thinking about how do we build diverse pools of candidates for senior leadership roles. And some of the things that we found to be extremely successful on the external front are just relationships that organizations form and that we've formed. And these are really things that any organization can do. I think one thing we heard from our study, there's a perception out there that to invest in this work requires a lot of money and people and resources. And I think as I was thinking about, you know, this recommendation in particular, a lot of these relationships are no to low cost. So these are things any organization can do. But we've found that affiliation groups can be very successful. Affiliation groups and partnerships with organizations that tend to have a diverse participant base. So this could be anything from, you know, the National Black MBA Association to graduate school student clubs to organizations like Teach for America that have a real focus on diversity and therefore have a diverse alumni base. Food Corps is another one. Management Leadership for Tomorrow is a specific organization specifically dedicated to grooming leaders from different backgrounds for leadership positions. So there's a lot of excellent organizations out there that you can proactively form partnerships with, and they're very eager to get, you know, to build those relationships. The other thing we've seen organizations do is really activate their network in a powerful way, and in particular, leverage staff from diverse backgrounds to help spread the word about opportunities, to engage in informational interviews and attend recruiting events. We work with an organization, the New Teacher Project, and they actually have recruiting committees, and they're very, very intentional about the composition of those committees so that they are reflective of the composition of talent that they're trying to recruit into their organization. They're also extremely specific about what they request those individuals to do. So when we saw successful network activation practices, sending out an email to your network and asking them to spread the word was not as effective as, you know, giving somebody a very specific ask. Can you send me the name of one person who you know might be fantastic? In the New Teacher Project instance, they would ask their individuals on their recruiting committee to attend specific events during the course of the year and to hold a certain number of informational interviews with candidates over the course of the year. So because people had a very specific request, they were able to fulfill those obligations, and again, they didn't have to craft the vision and figure out how to engage in this work. They just had to, you know, prioritize it and be available. And what we find is that people are very excited to do this work and really just need direction around what's the best way that they can support the organization's diversity and inclusion initiatives. Another great relationship that we've seen be fruitful for organizations are actually consulting firm alumni offices. They can be an excellent source. And also, many corporate externship programs have a diversity focus. So we worked with an organization that, you know, would bring talent in from, in this case, it was a consulting firm for a year, and there was an actual diversity focus in the program, so that was a fabulous pipeline for them. And many of those people would end up staying on, you know, for longer periods of time and become full-time employees. Of course, search firms can be a great source as well, you know, especially those that are really focused on diversity. I know at Koya, it's one of our core values. It's something we measure and track, so you should certainly, as you're looking at different firms, they should be able to tell you the percentage of finalists that are, you know, from diverse backgrounds, the percentage of placements that are leaders of color. At COIL, a third of our placements are leaders of color, and that should absolutely be something that information you should be able to get from any search firm you're partnering with. So the thing is, you know, one of the things we revealed as well, though, and I think this is actually something that many organizations forget, it's not just about building a diverse pool. You also need to be intentional about having an equitable selection process. So we found that organizations who do this extremely well, they make sure that their interviewers are aware of personal biases, and there's some training around that, and there's support around that, and how to mitigate those biases. They make sure that during the selection process, candidates are reviewed by diverse panels of interviewers. And we found that to be very beneficial from two perspectives. On the one hand, it certainly helps to sell candidates from different backgrounds on an organization, so you're much less likely to successfully get a yes at the end of the process. And on the other hand, we found again that organizations were more likely to make better hiring decisions because, as we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we know that diverse groups of people think about things from different perspectives and just end up making better quality decisions and really considering all of the information. In addition to, I mentioned around this practice, it's not just about cultivating external talent, and this is something that I think is often forgotten. And we saw this in particular. Our study showed a real gap. We found that talent was far more diverse in the up to about the VP level, and then there was a huge drop-off once you went from director to VP. Those levels in organizations, VP level, C level, became far less diverse. And so we really want to highlight how important it is to develop the talent that you have so that you have internal pipelines, and that when you do attract and recruit diverse talent at different levels, they're able to progress through the organization and at the same rates, and that there's really equity around those processes too. So, you know, some of the things we see organizations doing around the development front is, A, they know who their top performers are. They have really high quality, objective performance data about their talent. So the only way you can do this well is to focus on performance management and have a really best-in-class performance management program. You know, that means you have organizational goals, you have individual goals, you are tracking progress toward goals on a real-time basis. You have the systems and reports to illustrate those things, and you have, you know, ready access to that information. You have organizational competencies. Your employees know what those are, and you're measuring people on those as well. So you have really high-quality data around what people are accomplishing and how they're doing it that helps you to identify top performers are, who your top performers are. What this does is it makes sure you're not relying on gut or who happens to have exposure to the right people. And this is what really helps to minimize personal bias in the identification of high performers. And we all know personal bias exists and has real ramifications. So the more an organization can set up good systems and practices around performance management, the more you can have equity in terms of how talent gets identified for new opportunities. The next step is, oh, sorry, yes, please.
Yeah, Allison, I was just going to reiterate that point because I think it's so important to ensure you've got those that culture of focusing on developing, mentoring, sponsoring individuals within the workplace, because that's where I've seen a lot of organizations go awry. They'll do a great job in terms of hiring individuals, and then once they get into the door, there's nothing there.
It's sink or swim. Yeah, it becomes sink or swim, and so I think that is so important. And particularly for your high performers who you want to be grooming for leadership positions, they're the ones that you want to be strategically investing in with coaching and mentoring programs. You want to have a strategic succession plan and have your high performers woven into that so that there's professional development happening that is informed by and aligned with projected future hiring needs. And so I think that was really a key piece. The other thing we found was that there seems to be just an overwhelming focus on recruitment in general in the space. This idea of, if we just hire fabulous people, they will be successful and they will thrive. And again, we found when we looked at the data that actually wasn't necessarily the case, that as you look at the leadership ranks, people are going external to find talent and not hiring from within as much as you would expect. And I think that just indicates that there's not as robust of professional development as one would like to see. And again, this doesn't necessarily have to be a highly expensive strategy. There's a lot of research out there that shows that on-the-job challenges coupled with really high-quality mentoring and coaching is the most powerful equation for professional development. I think what we find, and we know that there are so many different opportunities in this sector to innovate and so many challenges to be addressed. So the opportunity to develop through experience and exposure is literally unlimited. But I think the key gap we see is that it oftentimes is not intentional. And so people will sort of, in a haphazard way, be assigned challenging assignments and then not necessarily get the support and reflection time that they need for those to be successful learning opportunities that develop them and position them for future roles with expanded responsibility. So I think that's one I love to highlight because it's something any organization can do. Not all nonprofits that we work with are large enough to have rotational programs and some of the things that you see in Fortune 500 companies, but that doesn't mean you can't have an extremely powerful professional development equation. So the last practice that I want to highlight is about this idea of internal dialogue and having organization-wide conversations about diversity, talking about what's working, what's not working, what are other people doing, what do we need to be doing differently. I think that sometimes this topic can almost be treated like the third rail. Nobody wants to touch it, but in reality, to have an inclusive organization that approaches this work in a healthy way, there has to be some dialogue happening, and that can manifest in a couple of ways. Certainly, we talked about how important it is to solicit feedback, and a great way to do that is through an engagement survey, as Nancy mentioned, and then look at how different subgroups are experiencing your organization. Are there differences? Are there subgroups you're at risk of losing? Are there ones that are very highly engaged? And how do you build off of those successes versus are there others that are at risk? And really understanding how our staff equitably engaged across the organization, and if not, what can you do about it? So that I think that when I think about internal diversity and inclusion work, having a high-quality engagement survey and analysis of that is just foundational. It's such an important piece so that you can really start to make some data-driven decisions about the work. With that, I would say, again, this is a dialogue, so it's really important that if and when you do that, engage in that process, you report back, you share what you learned, you share your action plans, you even engage staff in helping to craft solutions. You certainly are engaging leadership in that whole process and in answering core questions around, why is this important to us? How does it play out in our programming? Are there areas of tension? Oh, sorry? Are there areas of tension? Let's talk through those. Let's resolve them. These can be very challenging conversations, and they certainly do require a lot of courage. But the organizations who can have a healthy dialogue about these issues are more inclusive and they're more resilient. It certainly can help to have an outside facilitator in these situations, but what we've found is that you really cannot have a diverse organization and you can't capitalize on your diversity without an inclusive culture and environment. And that actually, if you don't have that inclusive culture environment, it can actually it can detract from your diversity strategy because it can start to repel staff from different backgrounds if they're having a bad experience. So it's so important to think about how you engage in that dialogue. And of course, there's a lot of great practices around this, so you don't always need to reinvent the wheel. There are great examples of success here, and we certainly get exposed to a lot of those in our work we do with clients. I'll speak to one example of a client that we've worked with that has built basically almost like a steering committee, and there's several different categories of work that the steering committee does, but one of them is around ongoing dialogue related to issues around diversity and inclusion. So they sometimes have brown bag lunches where everybody reads an article and they have a discussion around it, or they may have a facilitated conversation about a real-life situation that happened with one of their constituents, and they weren't totally certain how to address it, and they disentangle that topic together and think about what some possible solutions could have been. So again, these can be very, very elaborate, but they can also be, very, very simple, low-cost activities that help people engage in good dialogue that is focused and productive and has, and allows you to collect insight and feedback from your staff.
And Allison, I was just going to add another practice I've seen around that communication piece. And one of the organizations I worked with, they would have a diversity and inclusion week where they specifically on various aspects and had various training sessions. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be 1 week. It could be a day or two. But just to get the entire organization focused and thinking about diversity and inclusion was something that they made a part of their strategic plan and made sure that there was a diversity and inclusion week on an annual basis.
Yeah. I think the more you create opportunities for people to talk about this, the less and less it has the stigma of being that third rail conversation. We've seen actually one of the clients we work with also, they do a phenomenal anti-bias training where they actually have their staff take an assessment. And when I share this with people, I think their initial reaction is, oh my goodness, this sounds terrifying. But they allow people to take an assessment that reveals what their personal biases are, because we know we all have them. And it doesn't mean that we're bad people. But the problem is that when we're not aware of them, bad things can happen and unintended things can happen. So they just kind of do a training where they, take away the judgment and the stigma behind it and say, okay, well, we know we have them, so let's figure out what are they. And staff are able to do this self-reflective process and really, engage in it, again, in a solutions-oriented, productive way that really, I think, has had some tremendous implications on both their recruitment efforts, but also in terms of how managers think about their team and people that work for them and performance and who, what opportunities they're giving to what people. The more you're aware of those things, the more you can be cognizant of when they may be impacting your judgment in very minute ways in some cases, and in other cases in larger ways that you just may not be aware of. So there's a lot of ways and a lot of tools out there to do this in a good way, and I think I think it just, again, takes somebody sitting down and really thinking about, okay, how do we want to do this? What are we going to do? And putting together a plan. Are we going to bring do we want to bring in external expertise? Do we want to start with something internally driven and assess where that takes us? But there needs to be somebody behind it leading it. So I'm going to stop there, and we have shared a bunch of information. I want to take a moment to address any questions that the group might have. So Justin, I know you've been monitoring comments that have been coming in on Q&A. Is there anything that Nancy or I can respond to?
Yes, there is. I'd first like to remind anyone, if you have questions at this time, please enter them through the chat box in the right-hand side of your screen, and we will take them as they come in. But yes, a question for Allison and Nancy, the first one. We talked a lot about what it takes to actually make this a part of like your institutional culture to really work, and it can't just be one and done. How can I convince my senior leadership that diversity is important? Are there studies I should be turning to, specific statistics?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think you absolutely do need to have senior leadership buy-in for this work to really happen in a meaningful way. And there's definitely, the leaders we work with in organizations prioritize it in varying ways. From my perspective, when we're working with leadership teams on this work, we always try to tie it back to their priorities. What's important to them, and how is this going to resonate with them? So I think just having an understanding of your internal leaders' business priorities or organizational priorities, and being able to articulate how this work is going to inform those solutions. So, for example, an organization that we worked with was really focused on innovation and innovative solutions, and so that's what we used to influence thinking around this. Is there are the studies that show a direct correlation between diversity in leadership and innovative solutions. We've also worked with organizations that were really focused on cultural sensitivity to their constituents, and really wanted to make sure that the staff serving the communities they serve really had cultural competence in engaging with those populations. And so that's how we, broached this topic. So I think part of it is really first taking a step back and understanding what are their priorities and how does this work enhance those priorities, and tying those things together.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that as well. But the other part of it too is they talked about resources. I mean, Allison touched on a couple of those, but one in particular that's done a lot of great work has been like Talent for Innovation. I mean, they've done a lot of great work in studies around women in the workplace. So I think, coupling that with tying it into your organization's mission helps to support and build that business case.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. Our next question, how do you apply all this to board recruitment? Does it change? Is it very similar? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question as well, and I think that's something we've heard loud and clear from organizations, that it's not just about thinking about staff internal in the organization. You need to have a board that's also diverse and reflective of the organization and the communities that you're serving. And so absolutely, I think you want to be focused on that. Board recruitment is, I think that there are some similar things that are transferable to that realm. When we talked a lot about recruitment strategies and forming strategic partnerships, and broadening your network, and certainly all of those things are applicable. I think the other thing I would say is we've found that sometimes something that can be really helpful is to think about the requirements for your board of directors and what role, how different varying roles what the different give-get might be for a board member. So one thing that we've found can be challenging with board diversity efforts is when there is a equivalent give-get that is expected of all members, because that certainly does limit your, it limits the population through which, have the type of financial resources that you might be asking to contribute. So some boards of directors have, had some positions be more focused on the fundraising piece, and there's a give-get there financially. Other positions might be more focused on, some of the diversity efforts and opening the organization up to new relationships and new, new practices and ways of thinking about things. So I think one thing we've seen organizations do is just differentiate their board member roles a bit to help them attract a more diverse pool of candidates for those seats.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question, this organization is in a small town with not as many resources or as much diversity. Where should they look for executive leadership mentoring?
That is a fantastic question. I mean, I think the beauty of living in the day and age that we live in is that so much can be done remotely, particularly from a mentoring and coaching perspective. I mean, I know just even speaking personally, I have, mentors and coaches around the country that I talk to and collaborate with and offer mentoring and coaching to folks around the country. So I think that geographic, that shouldn't be so much of a limitation when you think about mentoring and coaching opportunities. I mean, there's definitely executive coaches who can work virtually. There's a lot of opportunities out there to broaden your networks beyond your specific geographic area, such as LinkedIn, going to conferences, attending different, workshops and seminars, and just broadening the people that you're exposed to. So I think, that can actually be really accomplished much more readily in today's day and age, where you have Skype and you have, phone conferences and things like that, than even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I would echo that, and there was a specific organization that I know one of my clients worked with because they didn't have a lot of female leadership within the organization, but they wanted to be able to mentor some of their female leaders with other successful female executives, and they were able to do it, and they did it all virtually. So you're right, we're living in a day and age right now where between email and social media, it's just a great opportunity to be able to expand beyond your local geography.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And then finally, what are some of the trends that you two are seeing in diversity inclusion as we move into the next few years?
Allison, I can kick off a couple of things
Sure.
that I've seen. One of which, I think it's happened over the past couple of years, is definitely that broadening of the definition of diversity and inclusion as a trend that I've been seeing. So when I first started doing HR work, it was very specific to say people of color. Now it has broadened to say, well, what about people who may, come from diverse backgrounds or think differently, or maybe they're gay and lesbian. So it's much more broader in terms of the dialogue around diversity and inclusion than I've traditionally seen in the past. And I think it will continue to go down that path as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the trends that I am just starting to see and that I frankly hope we see more of is a shift from just focusing on recruitment and also focusing on, you know, more sophisticated elements of diversity and inclusion, the culture of the organization, internal development opportunities for, you know, for people from different backgrounds, talent development, all of that. I think that's broadening as well, and I think that is really just critical. You know, it's not just about sort of who's, you know, who's applying to positions and who's getting hired, but how are they supported and developed over time within an organization.
Great, thank you. And with that, we'll conclude our Q&A. A reminder to everyone in the audience, if you do have a question that wasn't able to be addressed or you think of it later, always feel free to email us directly, and that information will be available at the end of the presentation. I'll now hand it back over to you, Allison.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for participating. We do have some appendix materials as well in our presentation. So if there's some examples specifically of vision statements and mission statements around diversity and inclusion work that we thought were best in class examples to share with the group. And there's also some more information, another slide around how the mechanics behind why diversity, how diversity makes us smarter and more innovative and more impactful. So for those of you looking for persuasion materials, I think that will be of interest. It's been a delight speaking with everybody. You know, we certainly hope that you will connect with us on LinkedIn. COIL Leadership Partners does have a you know, a LinkedIn page, and we often post articles and blogs and things that I think could be of interest to this group related to this work. So please do sign up for that and connect with us. And if you ever are looking for support in this area, please feel free to be in touch. We would be happy to talk with you about that. We'll also, and Justin, I'll share this with you, we actually have a diversity audit that we've developed, and we will be sure to share that as a tool following up from the webinar that you can send out with the presentation as well. So we'll make sure we get that to everyone as well. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, as a reminder to everyone in the audience, today's slides and the recording of the webinar are going to be posted to Nonprofit Ready within 24 hours. We'll be sending you a follow-up email to the link to the Nonprofit Ready portal shortly. Thank you to you all for attending today and for your participation, your questions in the Q&A. And a huge thanks to Allison and Nancy. It was a fantastic presentation. I was really inspired, and I hope that the audience has got some great takeaways from what we learned today. So thank you very much to everyone, and have a